Classifying seismic events related to solar activity. That's a paper I've just posted on my social media page. Basically linked to a bunch of Russian academics around Almaty, which is it's a facility in Russia that's normally where a lot of sensitive research is carried out. Also very familiar. If anyone's familiar with, I think it's Alexander Kouzminov, doctor who's considered the father of the um, neutron bomb, tectonic bomb. He basically is the guy that turns around and says that effectively you don't need a huge amount of mass to cause an earthquake. It's all about leverage. And he linked very much early on to the sun's activity. And I think it was Vulcan was one, and there's Mercury with two, basically kind of experiments which he was involved with during in the early 1970s, which led the Americans to believe that the Russians were trying to work out on their own earthquake bomb. And they then turned around and started getting involved in this material as well. And according to Bernard Easton, who's a bit of a sketchy dude, I'll give you that. But basically, their version was the HARP. And whereas not correct is that, pardon me, he says that HARP was the Americans' first effort to do this. Well, if that technology does what he says it does, then no, it wasn't actually the United States of America. It was actually carried out in Australia, and I think I want to go 23rd, but it was 1993, May 23rd. Big solar burst basically lit up like the sky. Night turned into day of Australia, caused an earthquake at the same time. A guy called Henry Mason kind of tracked it down. He was a geologist, and he tracked down the epicenter of the earthquake to basically about 3 kilometres away from a place called Bandawara, which was like, it's easy. I might not have been pronouncing it properly, so it's easy to look up. Leverton, Leverton, Western Australia. And Leverton is the Royal Australian Air Force's electronic warfare base, and it was built in 1993. And it's basically an exact replica of HARP. Now, the interesting thing about that epicenter is that occurred just about 30 days. The Japanese cult, Shirinko, death cult, very lots of right wing connections, lots of links to the military, Japanese version of the CIA and the Yakuza. Very, very, very James Bondy stuff. And they basically bought that farm about 35 days beforehand. They also had a lot of links to like the Moonies, and they're kind of like a sub branch. It kind of gets kind of complicated, but the key thing all we need to know about is that what came out was Henry Mason discovered that Sam Nunn, who held a symposium on weapons of mass destruction, which William Cohen spoke at, I think in 1998, Georgetown University, and he turned around and said that yes, actually, there are different people out there that can, cause volcanoes and earthquakes. And in the original speech, which is available now today on the Pentagon website, you'll see he actually made reference to cults at that particular speech. When I mentioned this on the radio, I think it was Vinnie Eastwood show, 2010 thereabouts. But when after that they came in and they clipped out the word cult, and there's been lots of debunking and trying to just demystify. But along the way, what remains, regardless, even if you accept and you don't track the story and see how it changed all the way. My entry into the story actually came before the cult was even known about. I think it was the 19. It was very early onwards, because I spoke to Christian Chamaret when the cult had just had its event, and she was the Green MP for Western Australia, and she confirmed that yes, these guys had come in, they've been found with all these sort of like crazy chemicals and strange scientific material, and basically the customs were told to like leave them alone, and that was the Australian Federal Police. And from that point onwards, the story started to change, and they tried to distance away. But what we do know is that the technology that was actually collected from that Leverton after the cult became, synonymous, and people started looking at this ranch in the middle of nowhere, was all that stuff was collected up by the Australian authorities, who very shortly afterwards started developing their own electromagnetic weaponry, which was using Russian technology. And that's very relevant again, because what did come out in the two committees was one held in Australia, one held in America, by the way, by Sam Nunn, looking at where this cult were actually directly connected to basically, earthquake causing technology. I mean, they took it seriously enough to go to that level. Just think about, let that sink in. So what they realised was these guys had been buying all sorts of strange technology off the Russians. A lot of stuff that had, at the end of the Cold War, Russians were broke, so a lot of stuff was being sold off that shouldn't be. And these guys had also made a big trip to the Tesla Museum, I think it was in Czechoslovakia. Um, And they were very interested in technology. And this is all relates to because just recently the Rocket Lab launched, bear in mind that Rocket Lab already has launched a satellite called Quake Tech. And the Quake Tech was basically looking at whether the pulsations in the electromagnetic Earth could be used as precursors to detect earthquake technology. Now, apparently they lost that and they don't know what the results of the technology was. But the point was they were doing this stuff to begin with. And then there's a couple of Japanese academics out there as well who have also turned around to like use GPS to kind of like GPS all goes around the world, and when there's like electromagnetic influences, this can have an impact on the GPS on your phone towers, and that apparently can be used as a precursor for detecting earthquakes. So a lot of research in this area. Increasingly, people are realizing what's happened is that traditionally journalists have gone to geologists, and geologists goes, oh no, what happens to the sun doesn't have any impact on earthquakes, and oh no, the moon doesn't affect the tides whatsoever at all. And eventually astrophysicists sort of turned around and said, look, that's very cute, but would you mind actually sticking in your alleyway, and because you don't know what you're talking about, actually, tides can be affected by moons, and actually, as we're starting to understand more and more about space and cosmic weather, we're starting to realize that there is this precursor. Now, this is all very relevant because the two launches back to back, very much related to military, very, very classified. One of them was Bridging the Swarm, which we'll come back to in a second. And the other one was Rise and Shine, and again the heraldry on that involves fighting fish, which again have a link to in mythology into earthquakes, and that was again a link into this swarm technology, and they actually talk about they specifically say that the part of the mission is all sorts of things involved, lots of technology demonstration, lots of classified, but one thing to say is it's there for disaster mitigation. Now these were launched 2 days before the events took place in Japan, and again we saw similar kind of events in terms of technology being deployed and what was happening in Alaska a few months ago. So that's incredible enough to launch these things up there for disaster mitigation, and then bang, an earthquake occurs. But the more significant bit is this name, Bridging the Swarm. Now, swarm is a rare proton spike proton? Yes, that's right, proton spike. So when the sun goes boof, it creates this massive displacement of energy. And this is what that original article I wrote to begin with, catalyst mix, sun and the catalyst X's. I mean, I'll look it up when I do the write-up. I'll have the exact wording of that article and the sourcing on it at the bottom of the footnote or the description for this YouTube. So if you want to find it, just go there. But basically the point is saying, yes, this stuff, actually we're studying it and we're realizing that there is a direct event precursor to causing earthquakes. Doesn't mean it's causing earthquakes, but it does mean that they're recognizing this relationship. Although if you turn around and you start to look at other experiments, they're looking about actually what they're all about. The Bridging the Swarm is about capturing this energy and actually being able to basically direct it how you want. That's when we start to move into this area of going, you're talking about geo-warfare technology. And when I say geo-warfare technology, I mean that's the terminology that was used when Owen Wilkes was looking at Operation Long Beach, I think Long Bank. This was carried out in the 1970s near where Blenheim Air Force Base in Waihopa. In fact, Blenheim Air Force Base was actually where it was taking place. And one of the things he described, when you remember reading the description of trying to get Owen Wilkes was a very, 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 very good researcher. One of the things he came up with him was this developing technology that may be used to actually trigger earthquake, and the terminology that US military used for it was geo-warfare. So in the 1970s, we already know that the Americans were very interested in technology. And again, previous videos I've done in the past have turned around. I've cited the documents which I pulled out of the National Archives, which look at all the very, very highly, super classified, above top secret research that was done into sun occultation, in other words, the sun pulsating, which was first realized when around about the same time, not saying when it happened, when the nuclear bomb, this didn't occur, but when the nuclear bomb went off, around about the time they were paying a lot of attention to space, and somebody went, hey, the sun does these pulse things, and they started looking into it, and they started to realize that this had huge weapons technology, and it was pretty much shared with everybody that wasn't a Nazi at that time. So That's the very interesting thing about bridging the swarm. Now that I found out what a proton swarm is, that turned around to me and went, well, wait a minute, can that cause earthquakes? Looked up Google report, and I went straight to that particular academic paper that I've got as linked into this YouTube clip. So have a good day and rock and roll.